Hi everyone, and welcome to this Waltham Forest SWP meeting on the gas industry in crisis, why capitalism is not sustainable. Thanks all for joining on time. Welcome. I can see a couple of new faces as well, so that's great. We're very happy to have Jessica Walsh here to introduce the topic. Jess will speak for about 20 minutes, and then there'll be plenty of time for any questions and discussion after that. And then we'll have a brief second half where we sort of discuss some important things that are going on around the borough and share some announcements as well. So I'll hand over to Jess whenever you're ready.
Thanks so much, Ruby, and thanks for having me, Waltham Forest Branch. Okay, so we're going to be discussing apparently new period of crisis that we're entering just after 18 months of crisis caused by the pandemic. It seems we're entering into another winter of crisis in Britain, where some of the poorest sections of society will be the ones made to pay for it, where working people are forced to struggle to meet their needs in a crisis not of their own making. And when you add up all the stories of what we're looking at this winter, if you think about just this week, for instance, some of the poorest people in society will be £20 a week worse off as universal credit is slashed. This is just as, gas bills, as we all know, are expected to reach really new commanding heights. Inflation is set to be over 4%. This is going to push hundreds of thousands of people further into poverty. I don't know about near where to you are, but at the end of my street, there's a petrol station that's had a long queue at the end of it down my street for at least over the weekend. Working people not being able to get the fuel they need to get to work or to get to school. And I think there's a real sense of panic and dread in society at the moment when you add up all of these things. And I think while Boris Johnson and the Tories want to kind of escape any blame for this, they're kind of trying to pass the buck to anyone for this developing crisis in energy. I think we have to be clear in saying that the energy crisis we're facing this winter is 100% the blame lies with a regime of marketization and privatization of our energy sector. This is a regime that's been pursued, aggressively by the Tory party for decades. Starting in the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher and the Tory government privatized not only sections of the energy sector, but large, other parts of the public sector. Importantly, they floated British Gas and other regional electricity boards onto the stock markets on the pretense of, markets are going to improve competition and therefore prices in the energy sector. We saw the proliferation, especially in recent years, the outcome of this being there's, competition from smaller companies. These are the ones that are now in so much trouble, right? These are the ones that cast themselves as rebels against the biggest energy firms. These are the ones, they don't really have much infrastructure or big offices or staff, so they can be nimble and efficient and offer cheaper rates. People are encouraged to switch more often to get the best deal, right? And these smaller companies also insisted that, unlike the big six providers, they didn't need big financial reserves to buy energy long in advance. But that meant, buying at current market rates always, and kind of taking a huge financial gamble that the wholesale gas price would remain low. And this, for a time, allowed these companies to undercut their rivals, to offer kind of cheaper household energy deals. And for a time, the owners of these companies got really spectacularly rich. This was kind of hailed as an example of the free market at its best, and proving that kind of competition and marketization was in the interests of everyone. This had the added effect of kind of disincentivizing larger energy companies who actually own infrastructure from investing in their own infrastructure, for investing in storage and renewing and improving the energy infrastructure that they had. For instance, Centrica, decided to close the largest gas storage facility in the UK in 2017, rather than commit to investing to keep it open, as it wasn't profitable for it to do so in this kind of low price, cutthroat, competitive market that we've been in for the last few years in the energy sector. So it used to be the done thing to store gas in these facilities to smooth out prices over seasonal fluctuations. That used to be the strategy, the energy strategy. But really, that short-term search for quick profits stopped this practice. And the companies justify this by saying that the UK can always rely on importing gas from the continent to fill in any gap, or buying from wholesale markets. So really, this move to kind of a footloose, low investment economy has made our energy sector extremely fragile, and this is now bearing fruit. Kind of resiliency in the energy sector has been traded in for flexibility and kind of short-term profitability. And this is now bearing fruit in the crisis that we're experiencing, and it's working people and the state is expected to foot the bill for this gamble that's been perpetrated in this sector. So people may have seen that. Well, I'm sure people have read in the news and probably noticed your own energy bills have been going up. Gas prices rose very sharply in the last few months, meaning that many smaller firms could no longer afford to honour the great deals they had offered to customers. So their strategy of relying on low prices and gambling that they'll stay low kind of came to a spectacular end, and many of these went to the wall. I think 3 energy companies went bankrupt or went out of business today, just to show you how quickly this is developing. And now the energy supply industry, which has, so benefited and welcome kind of unfettered market forces to make themselves rich, is now begging for kind of state bailouts and support from the state. For instance, people may have reported in, Socialist Worker and other places that the bosses of these energy companies want the Tories to create what they call like a publicly owned bad bank to absorb the debts of smaller firms and allow the bigger ones to survive. And the debts there would be underwritten by our money, by taxpayer money, basically. So all the risks that were taken by these companies, the gains from them will be privatized, while the losses are to be footed by the public bill. And really, this is just another crisis created by the market. It is once again the state being asked to underwrite and pay the price for this short-term thinking. Many people have been made rich in the intervening years of this, where this culture has been allowed to develop in the energy sector, and it's run down the resiliency, as I've said, of the energy sector as a whole. And there'll be little to no consequences for those people. Meanwhile, as we know, working class people will be probably at least £300 a year worse off in terms of household energy costs, if people can afford to keep their heating on at all. And of course, then it will be taxpayer money that's being used to bail out these companies. And there was an interesting article in the Financial Times today where they were kind of comparing the gas crisis that we're experiencing now to the crisis that broke out in the financial sector in 2007, leading to the global financial crisis, as it's called, and the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. The gas crisis has revealed, I think, that stripping operations to bare minimum is great, as we've talked about, for reducing costs, maximizing utility, so-called. It also introduces the same sort of risks that apply to banks that don't have, that are undercapitalized, that don't have sufficient reserves, or that rely on short-term funding to finance their operations. If and when the wholesale market, the market for loans or the market for gas in this situation, if it seizes up, if prices suddenly spikes, usually these operators have no reserve or production of their own to fall back on and require bailouts to continue operation. And this risk is especially high in wholesale markets, where there are actual structural choke points on the supply side, where there is something that actually has to be delivered, a physical commodity, right? And I think the situation is analogous to the British gas system, that, the crisis that we're facing now, except unlike what happened in financial markets, this is not something that can simply be fixed by throwing a heap of central bank money onto the problem. The choke points that exist are actual problems of supply, right? It may be that there is not enough gas to heat people's home this winter. There may be real consequences to this in terms of, rolling blackouts like people have been warning us about. And bailouts can't magically engineer more natural gas. The Bank of England can't create more gas and pump it into the system. That the only thing they can do is transfer the high cost of sourcing this natural gas onto the government balance sheet instead of the private one. So again, we're talking about the privatization of all the gains of this gambling that's been going on, and the taking the losses onto the public books. And I think all of this underscores the real need to renationalize key sectors of our economy and plan for the needs of human beings and not the short-term balance sheets of these big companies. And I think there is obviously a short-term need for this, but there's also a medium to long-term need. And that is, the energy sector is going to have to change in the coming years to decarbonize, to avoid the worst of catastrophic climate change. Climate change, yet another crisis that's being driven by the rule of the market over the economy and over our lives, where the profits of fossil fuel corporations are prioritized over the health of our planet and over the potential future capacity for the planet to support human life in the medium to long term. So I think as socialists, we should be demanding at this point that energy companies, instead of being bailed out, should be renationalized to rise to the challenge of not only making sure working class people have the heating that they need to get through this winter, but to direct these companies to begin the process of decarbonization and create 1 million new climate jobs in a climate economy. We should demand that this is a process that puts the interests of workers and working class people and the environment right at its heart, instead of the short-term profits of the wealthy people in charge of these companies. We should be demanding that rapid decarbonization and large-scale investment that we need. We need to be making these demands in tandem, because the market, the kind of large-scale investment that we need and rapid decarbonization is not going to be achieved by the rule of the market, but by, I think, the political will of an insurgent climate movement with working class people at its heart, with climate justice at its heart. And these are the demands and the movements that all socialists should be building and popularizing, especially as we're in the run-up to COP26 talks, which will take place in Glasgow, but also as working class people across this country are facing horrific squeezes on their living standards in the next weeks and months. So gas prices are also having knock-on effects in other areas of the economy. It's spreading to other sectors and really deepening that sense of crisis, especially in the production of our food, where there is expected to be shortages as well. I didn't know this, but there are a number of gas-dependent fertilizer firms that have been entered into crisis and almost collapsed in the last week, because which has created a shortage of carbon dioxide, which is, only in a system as illogical as capitalism could you have a crisis being caused by an overabundance of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, but also have a shortage of carbon dioxide, meaning that people are not going to get the food that they need. But anyway, carbon dioxide is a byproduct released when creating ammonia-rich fertilizers, and then it's sold onto the food industry, where it's used in meat production. It's used to stun animals before slaughter, and it's also used as a preservative, and it's also used in the production of fizzy drinks as well. So a large US multinational in the last few weeks operating in the UK was bailed out by the Tory government after they closed their production. They shut down their production because they didn't want to pay the high gas prices that they would need to keep up. So they stopped production, therefore threatening food supply, very real food supplies for us. And instead of taking over the plants where this was being done and running them not for profit, running them to, for people's needs, the government struck a deal with this, enormous multinational company for them to keep operating, again, absorbing any losses that they expected to make, ensuring the company can protect its profits. And I think this underlies something that's often missed when these shortages are spoken of. It's not that there is actually a lack of food. It's not that there's actually not enough food or there's not enough gas. It's that the market is driving decisions about production instead of human needs. We're not planning for human needs, we're planning for the short-term profits of these companies. That means that these shortages are being driven by short-term thinking, profit-first decision-making. And I think that underlines the need to fight for a system that puts human needs first. We know, don't we, that under capitalism, there is a great abundance of food, of energy, of housing. It's the great contradiction that there is enormous wealth in society alongside enormous poverty. The short-term profits of the capitalists are what's driving the decisions as opposed to where they're needed, meaning we can have thousands of empty homes in a city where many cannot find adequate housing, or a shortage of food for ordinary people while food is being wasted in great volumes because it isn't profitable for the big corporations to produce it. And I think really all of this is showing that the system of capitalism is increasingly incapable of solving these crises of its own making. The state and the taxpayer is being asked to cover up the inadequacies in the short term and keep the system going, and working people pay the price. Whether it's the crisis of the great financial crash, where the banking system caused a crisis that was bailed out with taxpayer money, and then it's austerity imposed on the population, to the crisis of the pandemic, where again the state was expected to step in and bail out the system and protect the profits of businesses, to the gas crisis now, to climate crisis, to all the other crises that are being driven by this. And I think we should be very angry right now at the Tories and their regime of marketization and privatization that causes chaos and abandons fulfilling real human needs to the whims of the market and the needs of the bosses. They continually bail out the system. The capitalists are continually bailed out while ordinary people are abandoned. And by the way, I completely disagree with the new leadership of the Labour Party in Keir Starmer and its Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, who say, now is not the time to argue for renationalisation. Now is the time, it's ideological to be calling for that. Now is the absolutely perfect time to be shouting from the rooftops about how the reign of marketisation, that, by the way, goes hand in hand with low wages and stepping on workers' rights, is failing overall. Three gas companies went bust just today. Southeastern Rail, a private rail company, had to be taken over by the government just last week for mismanagement and fraud. And I think really all the lies we've been told about the market are being exposed for what they are, that it produces better outcome, that it encourages creativity, it cuts costs for ordinary people, it creates more and better housing, that it's the best way for society to be run. That's all being exposed as lies. The market only profits those at the top, scooping up the profits, while we have increasingly less and less that's run for public good and that's run in people's interests. Trains are more expensive, energy prices through the rafters. If we can even heat our homes this winter, more food shortages, and of course the market-driven system that's driving us to climate breakdown. Crisis is almost a mode of living that we're getting used to under capitalism in the last 2 years in Britain. And I think to fix the energy crisis and the other crises plaguing our society, we have to challenge the rule of the market and big business in all parts of our lives. To talk about public ownership and taking on the Tories in their drive towards marketisation. But I think we have to go further than that and fight for a socialist system that prioritises people over the profits of those at the top of society. This means more to me, by the way, than just voting for Labour or fighting for, good motions in the Labour Party. Even the Labour Party at its best was not prepared to expropriate fossil fuel companies or the big landlords, or really take on the capitalists head on. really what it means to me to fight for a socialist society is building power from the bottom up amongst working class people to take on the system in its entirety. Working people are expected to do all the work in society. They're expected to foot the bill when the system fails. But more than that, workers' labour is essential to the proper functioning of the system, and that gives us enormous power when we use it. And I think that's where we need to be looking, not towards the Labour Party conference to see how we're going to change society, but really we need to be looking to working people, taking on the Tories and their system.